I'm Shirley Leung. Welcome to Say More. In 2018, the Supreme Court struck down a law that banned sports betting and ushered in a new era of gambling. Sports betting has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's as ubiquitous as it is lucrative. Roughly 1 in every 5 adults bets on sports. In his new book, Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling, Jonathan Cohen argues that the rise of online sports betting, fueled by the convenience of mobile phones, is leading to an out-of-control industry that puts the health and well-being of young men at risk. Jonathan thinks gambling has become a public health crisis, and we need guardrails just like we have for drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Jonathan Cohen joins us today here in the Globe studio. Jonathan, welcome to Say More.
All right, thanks for having me.
So I want to start in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision. How did the commercial sports betting industry get off the ground so quickly, and who are the players that made it possible?
So the way they got off the ground so quickly was they were ready to go. I've talked to sources at DraftKings and FanDuel at the time that they, as early as 2017, when the Supreme Court basically started the appeals process that would ultimately lead to the decision, they basically anticipated it and started building online sports books and retail products so that, in the event of the Supreme Court decision, they could launch right away. And then on the state government side, Delaware and a couple other states basically had trigger laws, sort of like we saw in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision on abortion, where immediately after the PASPA, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, fell, they were also sort of ready to go. So within 6 weeks of the court decision, retail betting went live in Delaware. New Jersey followed shortly thereafter, and then sort of it was a cascade from there.
I mean, in your book, you also point out how sports betting wouldn't be as big today if pro sports leagues had stayed on the sidelines. Tell me how and why the leagues embrace sports betting.
They really like money. I can expound, but that's sort of fundamentally what it was.
It's all about money.
Yeah, I mean, 3 or 4 years before the Supreme Court decision, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, comes out with an op-ed in the New York Times calling for a new national approach to sports betting, in part because he argued, making it illegal wasn't actually working. And then in parentheses, there's a lot of money to be made. So once we had legal sports betting, it was sort of inevitable that the leagues were going to go all in, pun intended, because of the sponsorship opportunities. And then because if people are going to get bet on their games, they want some modicum of oversight and some involvement for what they would call player protection and the protection of their games.
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, it comes down to money, and the leagues were willing to normalize sports betting. That was the role that they played, was they normalized sports betting by allowing, commercials, for example. And that is how the industry not just took off politically so quickly, but sort of took off culturally, basically just as fast.
How much money are we talking about? I mean, how lucrative is it for them?
The one Washington Post estimate is that the sponsorship revenue from sports betting for the NFL alone is the equivalent of if there were 2 additional teams in the league.
I mean, if you think about it, it's really incredible. I mean, decades ago, Major League Baseball, banned Pete Rose, right, from the Hall of Fame, eligibility because because of his sports betting. And, teams historically have opposed betting because they're worried, that someone involved, like a player or coach or a referee, they're going to throw a game because they want to make some money. I mean, what's changed? Is it really just money? What's going on here?
So in some sense, nothing has changed. In some sense, everything has changed, because what you just laid out was the exact argument the leagues made to get sports betting banned in the first place in 1992. It just so happened that the ban was unconstitutional, which is why the Supreme Court decision came down. But the argument was we need to tamp down sports betting as much as possible because it is through its popularity and through its access. And if we don't attack it, it will threaten the integrity of our games, as you described. Lo and behold, they banned sports betting, but sports betting doesn't go away.
Right.
And so that's the justification is, okay, sports betting is clearly irrepressible, so we might as well open it up and keep it on the open regulated market. That's the argument, at least at the time, was let's bring it to the open regulated market so we can monitor what is probably going to happen whether we like it or not.
So walk me through the mechanics of sports betting. So I download an app on my cell phone, and what's the user experience like?
The user experience is really good. The user experience is a lot like sort of like a social media account or like eBay or one of these other sort of billion-dollar companies that has a really well-designed, really seamless, really customer-friendly app. You log in. You're going to have to, for most companies, give a social security number and a way of depositing money. Whether some states it's through Venmo, some states let you do credit cards, some states let you do debit cards. And once you have money in, you're probably going to get some bonus, like, oh, Shirley, you deposited $100,
Right.
you get another $50 free or whatever. And now you're just going to be on this, sort of like mimicking the endless scroll of social media. There's just going to be an endless stream of betting options. This is not like what you would have imagined at a 1980s like Las Vegas sports book where there's like cigarette smoke wafting in the air and you can bet on like the Oklahoma State money line. This is like you can bet on like the Celtics money line, or you can bet on like whether Derek White is going to get the first rebound in the game, and just endless options of things to bet on, from the game itself to sort of micro moments within the game that might suit your pleasure, whatever, your betting pleasure.
So when you're scrolling through, like, what am I seeing? What makes me hooked?
Lots of things get you hooked in that there is betting options for everybody. If you're a Celtics fan and you just want to bet on the Celtics, great, like good for you. But for a lot of people, that's not enough. And especially someone who's addicted, they're not addicted to winning money, or even like they're not even addicted to like the sports themselves. They're addicted to action. And all they want is like to basically turn sports betting into roulette wheel or like a slot machine where you can just constantly bet on the speed of the next pitch, bet on who's going to hit the first shot, and so on. And then, lo and behold, 1 a.m. comes around and all the baseball games are done for the day. And in some states, you can bet on Malaysian women's doubles badminton, right? Because, of course, you were going to bet on Malaysian women's doubles badminton anyway. And we need to offer a legal opportunity to bet on Malaysian women's doubles badminton. So that's the kinds of things that would get you hooked, not just the ability to like go on the app. And we didn't touch on this, but like you can literally bet your mortgage payment in like 5 minutes. You can bet it in 30 seconds. You could bet like this, whether the next pitch will be over 88 miles an hour. You could bet like $15,000 on that if you wanted to.
No, but how does that happen? Are they sending you like text messages, or how do they lure you in?
Right. So people are signing up because of these promotional offers that you probably followed to sign up in the first place. And the real way people are getting hooked, to answer your question, is they probably, and this is true for most of the gamblers, sort of problem gamblers that I talk to, they probably win their first bet. And you win your first bet and you develop this sense of overconfidence that you're good at this and you're smart and you know how to do it. And this is why they have these crazy, insane promotional offers, like whether the Buffalo Bills will complete one pass. It's like, yeah, of course the Buffalo Bills are going to complete one pass, and they want to make it easy for you on your first bet so that you surely are like, oh my God, sports betting is so easy. I'm a genius. And then even if you lose your next 9, you're going to say, no, that was just an exception. I know that I'm good at this. And that's how you develop this sense of overconfidence that, in my experience, and from talking to specifically young men, is really, really hard for them to shake.
One of the things you point out in your book is that when they offer badminton or British darts, the only reason you offer that is because you are preying on people who are addicted. They're not super fans of British darts.
Right.
And so it's almost like these companies knew. They just wanted to keep offering you something.
Yes, they want. I see, minor league British darts or Malaysian women's doubles badminton. They are not trying to compete with the black market, which is often how they justify all sorts of things. They say, oh, we need to offer legal online sports betting because all these people are already betting illegally on, offshore casinos based in Antigua. And all we're doing is we'll bring that money, we'll create tax revenue out of it. We'll make legal money out of it. There's no one who's betting on minor league British darts on these offshore Antiguan websites. They are not actually providing a legal alternative to an illegal product. What they are doing is providing an outlet for someone's addiction who at 3 a.m. is chasing their losses and is just trying to bet on people describe to me as like they would bet on a coin toss if they could, and they're just basically picking minor league British darts players out of a hat and effectively betting on a coin toss.
Who's betting on these apps from DraftKings and FanDuel? What's the profile of a typical player?
Lots of people bet. I'll say it at the start. A huge percent, 20 to 40% of the American population, by some estimates, have a sportsbook app on their phone or
so
have
millions
bet on
of
sports.
people.
Yes. But disproportionately, if we're talking about not just who sports bettors are, but especially heavy bettors, including nowadays addicted bettors, are young men. Actually, disproportionately within that subset, non-white young men have shown sort of disproportionately high rates of having multiple sportsbooks apps on their phone. But if we're going to sort of reduce it and sort of simplify it, we're talking about men between the ages of, let's say, 18 through 35.
And I think you point out in your book, I mean, when you watch all these commercials, I mean, sports betting companies, I mean, they were they bought so many ads, right?
Yeah,
They're in
yeah,
the
yeah.
Super Bowl, they're everywhere, especially during the ramp up period. But you look at the pitchmen. The most memorable
Yeah, yeah.
ones are Black celebrities: Kevin Hart, Jamie Foxx, Shaquille O'Neal.
And even like someone like Kevin Hart, it's like, why is Kevin Hart like he's not an athlete, like why?
Right,
But the point is to get people, including black men, but anybody who's like not already a sports nut, but like
right.
will likes Kevin Hart, like maybe they'll be more interested in betting as a result.
Right. So, how does this profile of a sports bettor differ from the profile of someone who gambles in more traditional ways, like driving to the casino?
The demographics of online sports bettors specifically definitely skew younger than someone who would go to a casino. That, as you can imagine, is sort of an old person's game, and for a long time
Right.
you had to pay cash.
The little old lady on the slot machine, right?
100% right, and that reputation, if people have been to Encore recently, like it basically holds true. And so so demographically it's different, but experientially it's actually the same, right? The experience of betting on minor league British darts or the speed of the next pitch, again, is basically turning sports betting into a slot machine where you're just pulling the lever every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds. And with sports betting, you don't need to go anywhere. You're just sitting on your phone, on your couch, watching TV, just scrolling and swiping and making just as many bets.
Okay, Jonathan, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, let's dive into how you think sports betting has turned gambling into a public health crisis. Jonathan, we've talked a lot about addiction and how a lot of people are addicted to gambling because of sports betting. So what does it mean to be addicted to gambling?
Yeah, this is a really important distinction in that gambling is the only behavioral activity formally classified as an addiction by the American Psychiatric Association. So if you think about something like sex addiction or kleptomania, those aren't like actually technically addictions. Those are sort of behavioral disorders. Gambling addiction is an addiction in the way that like drugs or alcohol or tobacco can be literally addictive and sort of change the chemistry of your brain. So the formal definition, as these things, of course, have these sort of wonky technicalities, right? There's, I believe, 9 behaviors. And if you indicate or if you display 5 of those behaviors over the course of the previous year, you sort of formally, technically qualify as having a gambling addiction. But I think it's a helpful question because even if someone is not addicted, like even if they meet 4 of the 9 or 3 or even 1 of the 9, that can be an indication that something is wrong, or that can be an indicator of unsafe play. So it's helpful to remember that, yes, there are people who are addicted to gambling, but there will be lots of other people who can be negatively affected by gambling without formally developing what the American Psychiatric Association would dub a gambling addiction.
I mean, how many people are addicted to gambling?
So,
And that number's grown because of sports betting, right?
so this is where the data gets really tricky, and this is a really hard question. A curious fact sort of about American, sort of going back to the last 50 years of American history, is that we've rapidly expanded our menu of gambling options. We've added lotteries, we've added in-person casinos, we've added we've added online casinos in some states, we've added tribal casinos, you name it. But as far as we can measure it, the rate of Americans with a gambling addiction has stayed consistent at roughly 1% of the American adult population. Now, indications are, we only have state-level surveys for now, indications are that percent is rising or will rise with, again, the advent of online gambling is recent. It's just over the last 7 years. And particularly what's rising, even if it's not, again, this sort of the formal category of addiction, it's at least this at risk, or what I would call hazardous or problematic category that used to be 2 to 3%. Now it's 3 to 5%, but we're talking about like 5% of the American adult population. So like you do the math. So the numbers aren't there yet to say like, oh, we have an X% increase in actual formal gambling addiction, but certainly rates of gambling harm and people negatively affected by gambling are rising. And as we talked about, the demographics of who's affected have changed as well.
In your book, you profile several young men who have run into problems with gambling. Can you tell me the story of one of these men?
So his name is Kyle. He's sort of the main character of the book. He was living in Colorado. He was maybe 23 at the time when sports betting was legalized there in May of 2020. And he had bet a couple times in his life, had been to a casino and really never run into trouble. And then he saw online sports betting was coming in. He was so excited. He downloaded all sorts of apps on his phone to get in on the game. And then within like the first month or two, he like ran out of money. He like gambled his rent money, lost. His dad needed to bail him out. He sort of kept gambling a lot of money. He had to call the Colorado Problem Gambling Hotline at some point. He lost his job basically because, as he described it, he was like basically just gambling all the time, and sort of his mindset and his mentality and all of his attention was focused on gambling. He, of course, gambles his unemployment checks and all sort of remaining money that he does have in order to try to stay afloat. You know, it's gone from being a hobby and a fun activity to what he sees as sort of a way to make money. Lo and behold, he runs out of money again, has to move back with his parents in Wichita, which is where I visited him. And he still basically has what I would call sort of episodes of gambling addiction, where he'll go 6 months without gambling, and then the French Open comes around and he's awake for 40 consecutive hours betting live lines on different sets. And then, okay, the French Open is done. A couple months later, U.S. Open comes around, boom, same thing. And it's sort of this, he's sort of stuck in this cycle. And last I've talked to him, he's sort of out of it, at least for now. But of someone who was not gambling before, would not have been problematically gambling, certainly, and is now in what you'd call either a cycle of addiction or at least a cycle of harm, specifically because of the online availability.
I mean, what did Kyle tell you about the experience of sports betting? Did he seek help at all?
Okay, so just your first question, and this is important to say, like, he went into sports betting because it's fun. And I can attest, it like objectively is fun, and it is fun to bet on sports. And the problem is when it becomes like more than a hobby or more than just like something you do like while you're watching the game. It's something like a way you think you can make money, for example, or sort of he described it as like a second screen experience where like he had one screen open for like literally every other part of his life and then one screen open for just gambling. And that's why he ended up losing his job. He stopped dating because all he was doing was gambling. He ran into trouble a couple times and did seek help. So he called the gambling hotline in the state. He felt he had sort of a good experience, but not much more than that. And that's why I think he is sort of still stuck in this cycle, in this sort of episodic period of where he's cut himself off from a couple of apps, but not from BetMGM. And all it takes is one app on your phone to be able to bet, as much money as you want on the French Open.
Mm-hmm. So at the end of 2023, I interviewed Jason Robbins, the CEO of DraftKings, which is, here in Boston. And when we talked, Jason argued that sports betting can make for more engaged fans. And we're going to play a little clip.
If you could take a person who maybe would watch their team play every week, and instead they watch 6 or 7 different games in a particular sport, that is a multiplicative impact on just that one person. I mean, what I like to say is I don't think betting creates sports fans, but I think it turns sports fans into avid sports fans.
What do you think of that, Jonathan?
I think he is speaking to the Faustian bargain that the sports leagues are making with gambling, because he's right. It doesn't make sports fans, but because of the ubiquity of gambling in sports content, these days, I fear we're actually not even doing the first step, which is making the sports fans and then turning them into sports bettors. We're just making sports bettors who don't actually care about sports. They just care about gambling on sports. And again, I sort of fear over the long term, yes, right now, the NFL viewership is up and all sorts of other things are up for sports leagues, thanks in part to gambling. But over the long run, once these people run into trouble gambling or they stop gambling or they see the leagues as corrupt because of gambling, they're just going to stop being sports fans. So I think he's right. Sports gambling is a multiplier for fandom, but I fear that it is only that way in the short term.
So reading your book, I couldn't tell if you were for or against gambling. So how would you describe yourself?
I don't gamble a lot, but I have gambled on sports. And I think it's really important to emphasize that gambling is fun and can be fun and in fact can be harmless, right? That roughly 80% of sports bettors account for a total of 1% of sports betting companies' revenue because they're betting $5 on the Red Sox and like that's it. I'm in that 80%. The sports books don't care about me. I've bet like a total of $200 in my life or put a total of $200 into these sports apps in my life. But what I would love is if that's where it stopped, right? If it wasn't possible for someone to bet $5 on the Red Sox and for that to be the start of a dangerous journey that might lead them to becoming like Kyle or one of the other bettors I profile in the book.
So is it possible to make sports betting safe?
Okay, so I'm naive enough to think the answer is yes. And there are some specific guardrails that I advocate for. And they all sort of come down to this idea of friction. I would want something to slow the roll on sports betting and to make it so that you can't like fall down this rabbit hole so quickly. So the one that sort of sticks out to me would be a waiting period after you deposit money. You put money into your account, you lose your bet, all of a sudden you're mad, you want to put more money into your account so you can chase your losses, so you can keep betting, so you can keep betting, so you can keep betting. I think you put money into your account, 12, 24 hours later, now you can start betting with it. That would prevent this sort of cycle of loss chasing, which is one of the indicators of gambling addiction, that sort of can ultimately lead to problematic play.
You, in your book, you point out how the sports betting companies, they have a lot of data on people. They know who are the heavy bettors. They probably know who are the problem gamblers based on how much money they're spending. So why don't they just cut them off?
Have you heard of Money? Yeah, the same thing that the leagues were interested in. And it's not so simple as that. They of course are private companies. Their job is to make money for their stakeholders and so on. But part of the problem is they actually have no incentive to do so because of competition. And if DraftKings were to cut off, for example, an obviously addicted bettor, said addicted bettor could just download FanDuel, could download BetMGM.
Unless there are laws
Yes,
passed, right?
unless there are laws, or there is, and the industry has talked about sort of some sort of self-regulation sort of trade group, but I'm based on the history of self-regulation in tobacco and alcohol. I'm not super optimistic that that's going to go anywhere. But yes, if there were laws that said, someone is only allowed to make so many deposits in a day, for example, that might have a chance of cutting somebody off and stopping them, again, from entering this sort of snowballing effect in the cycle in the first place.
And in your book, I was really fascinated by the concept of, is it self-exclusion lists, where people would put themselves on these lists where they would ban themselves for life from betting. And so, I mean, could that be an effective measure or a tool?
It can be, as long as, again, we have interstate and intercompany collaboration. There's a case from Massachusetts of a young bettor in their 20s. He would just start driving to Rhode Island or start driving to Connecticut. So he ended up driving down all the way to Maryland, and every state along the way opted into the state self-exclusion list. So this is why I think we need a national self-exclusion list. You can sort of like cut yourself off from every company, every state, sort of no questions asked. So self-exclusion is great as a tool, but again, it gets better when you have more collaboration, when you have more agencies or more organizations, more institutions involved.
So here in Massachusetts, Northeastern professor Richard Daynard, he won a series of landmark suits against Big Tobacco. He's now going after DraftKings, alleging that its products are addictive. So are there any more lawsuits that really stick out to you?
There are three big lawsuit sort of categories, at least. There's a lawsuit from the city of Baltimore against DraftKings and FanDuel, sort of like the lawsuits that were filed against Big Tobacco by states, or you can imagine from local counties and cities during the opioid crisis, alleging predatory practices towards its citizens from the city of Baltimore. There's also lawsuits in Pennsylvania and New Jersey against DraftKings and some other companies about specifically VIP programs, which are company employees who get paired with basically heavy losers, and their job at these company employees is to entice these losing bettors to lose more and to keep gambling and to gamble on those apps specifically. So there are lawsuits from former gamblers who had VIP hosts, or there's one from the wife of a gambler who lost basically their entire life savings and their kids' college funds and everything, trying to sort of reclaim some of the money that the company, she would claim, sort of maliciously sort of usurped from her addicted husband. So those are two big categories. And then in Massachusetts, the lawsuit against DraftKings it's specifically over the terms of a promotional offer where, sign up and get $1,000 in free bonus bets. And his team at the Public Health Advocacy Institute allege that that's basically just misleading, and that this promise of $1,000 for bettors, but there's no actual conceivable way that someone signing up for sports betting could understand the preposterous terms of that offer.
I mean, it took lawsuits to rein in Big Tobacco. I mean, do you think it will take lawsuits to rein in sports betting?
Hopefully not, because these things take forever, but maybe. And Daynard told me that part of the point of these lawsuits isn't actually to win, not that he doesn't want to win, but part of the point is you go through the discovery process, and it leads to conversations like this one, sort of social pressure and social considerations by lawmakers, by journalists, you name it, on the industry in ways that it just wasn't receiving scrutiny.
So sports betting, is huge. As if you read your book, you're like, wow, it's growing like gangbusters. But do you think it's peaked, when it comes to mobile betting, or do you think something even bigger could come along? And what about, just being able to play poker online and bet, or blackjack? I mean, is that going to be big too?
In many ways, DraftKings and FanDuel, they built themselves as daily fantasy sports companies, suspecting that down the road they'd be able to offer sports betting. And in many ways, they're offering sports betting not because they actually want to offer sports betting, but because they want to offer online casino games, which is called iGaming.
And it's not legal now? Or
It's legal in 7 states, including in Connecticut, where I live. And I'll tell you firsthand, it is addictive and it is insane. And if you imagine someone like playing Candy Crush on the tee and like losing an hour, just imagine doing that with like a slot machine or roulette, like literally on your phone. And it is a much higher margin product. It makes more money for the companies than sports betting does. If you imagine just how fast those games work and how you can play literally the 7 hands of blackjack at the same time, again, on your phone with real money, this is the real North Star. This is where the companies really want to go. That's what they see as their real money maker. And it's a question of how quickly legislators will let them get there.
Well, Jonathan, this has been an eye-opening conversation. Jonathan Cohen is the author of the new book, Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. Thanks for joining us on Say More.
Thanks, and good luck.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Our producer is Caitlin Harrop, and our editor is Jim Dow. Uzair Ahmed is our sound engineer. You can reach us at saymore@globe.com. And if you like the show, please subscribe to Say More wherever you get podcasts and leave us a review while you're there. We really appreciate it. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.